I wish that everyone would just take their, just put their rational heads on your shoulders and look at that picture again, right? Look at that picture. It is a man, a grown-up man in fancy dress, except his fancy dress is a diamond-encrusted hat, ball and sceptre and fur robes. Why? Because he was born into the right family. It's just pathetic, this fascination with them. And to spend £8 million of taxpayers' money on that. By the way, he's having a massive pay rise, King Charles, so it'd be nice if he could pay for it himself. Massive pay rise. The sovereign fund is going up from 86 million, this is his, pocket money to just go and have some fun, going up from 86 million to 124 million. That's an inflation-busting pay rise there.
So you would say keep the Queen up there because it shows we've sort of had it with them?
I'd say it's so far down the priority list, and if someone wants to replace it, then they should do it out of their own pocket.
Actually, you just reminded me, when I worked as the correspondent in South Africa, it really struck me as bizarre that under the ANC government, led by Nelson Mandela, a lot of the roads in their big cities were still named after famous apartheid white-only governments. So there was Rian Milan Boulevard and things like that. And I asked one of the ANC people, why haven't you changed the road names? And he said, we've got other things to spend our money on. And I thought that was just a fantastic answer. They're not doing cosmetics here. This is life or death spending.
It's one thing to make a passing comment or a subtle dig on live television, those little barbs that just slide into a conversation and land so softly that, honestly, half the viewers might miss them on the first pass. But it's quite another thing to say something so precise, so scalpel sharp, that it doesn't just cut through the air. It slices open the entire illusion, letting all the pomp and grandeur spill out onto the studio floor in front of millions of people. That's exactly what happened when Marina Purkiss, sitting across from Jeremy Vine, glanced at a photograph of King Charles III in all his coronation regalia and, decided she wasn't going to indulge the mythology. She just wasn't going to sit there, nodding along reverently as the rest of the panel gushed about heritage and ceremony. Instead, she looked straight at the picture and delivered a line so disarmingly simple, yet so devastatingly effective, that you could practically hear the PR machines in Buckingham Palace grind to a halt. Look at the picture. It's a man in fancy dress, but the fancy dress is a diamond-encrusted hat, and with that she did something rare. She dismantled centuries of palace spin in 10 words. She stripped away the gold-gilded narrative, the hushed talk of tradition and duty, the fairy tale storytelling, and left viewers with the raw, unvarnished truth. This is costume. This is theater. This is a man playing a role, paid for by you, the British taxpayer, whether you buy into the show or not. That's the genius of the phrasing. If Marina had simply said, King Charles is wearing St. Edward's crown, it would have been factual, correct, and exactly the kind of respectful, deferential language the palace expects from media. It would have kept the mystique intact, reinforcing the sense that these objects are somehow sacred. But she didn't give them that satisfaction. She called it a diamond-encrusted hat, and in doing so, she reframed the entire scene. Suddenly, the solemnity was gone, replaced by something closer to a pantomime costume. That one choice of words robbed the monarchy of its aura. It forced the audience to see what was actually there, rather than what we've been trained to see. Because once you picture the crown as nothing more than a hat weighed down with nearly 3,000 diamonds, sitting atop the head of a man who has never had to worry about a single household bill in his life, the whole structure of reverence starts to crumble. The symbolism evaporates, and what's left is an uncomfortable question. Why does this man, born into unimaginable privilege, need to parade around in millions of pounds worth of jewels at a time when ordinary Britons are struggling to put food on the table or pay for heating? That's the conversation the palace does not want you to have, yet Marina's remark dragged it out into the light. And we have to talk about what this hat really is. The imperial state crown, the very same crown Charles wore at the coronation, isn't just some decorative accessory. It contains over 2,800 diamonds, as well as sapphires, emeralds, and rubies, each with a story attached, and, honestly, many of those stories are far from romantic. They are the stories of empire, of land seized, resources extracted, and treasures taken from colonized nations without consent and without return. The infamous Koh-i-Noor diamond, for example, now sitting in another crown in the royal collection, is still the subject of fierce dispute between Britain and countries like India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. These aren't just shiny stones passed down through the family. They're physical reminders of a colonial past Britain has never truly reckoned with. So, when Marina strips away the grandeur and calls it a diamond-encrusted hat, she's not just making a quip about the look of it, she's pointing straight at the uncomfortable truth that these symbols of monarchy are built on wealth acquired through exploitation. Every glint from those jewels is a flash of history, and not the kind the palace wants in their glossy documentaries. And here's where the bite of the satire goes deeper still. In Britain, fancy dress doesn't just mean formal or elaborate clothing. It means a costume you wear to a party. A pirate, a witch, a superhero. Something you put on to pretend, to perform. By describing Charles's coronation robes as fancy dress, Marina was suggesting that the monarchy itself is an act of performance. A play in which the roles are handed down by bloodline, complete with props, stage directions, and a script that hasn't changed for centuries. The ermine-trimmed cape, the gold-threaded robes, the jeweled scepters, these are not symbols of divinely appointed power. They are theater props, as essential to the role as a crown is to a Shakespearean king. And just like in theater, there's an audience, the public. Only difference is, this audience doesn't get a choice about buying a ticket. We're all paying for the show, whether we want to watch or not. Of course, defenders of the crown love to roll out the word tradition like it's a magic spell that stops all criticism. Tradition, they'll say, is the glue that holds the nation together. But not all traditions deserve to survive. The tradition of crowning a monarch with jewels taken from former colonies while nurses rely on food banks, that's not heritage. That's hypocrisy dressed up as ceremony. Marina's comment dares us to strip away the nostalgia and ask ourselves what we're actually looking at. Because if we saw a foreign leader in 2023 dressing up in a bejeweled hat and cape, parading in front of subjects during an economic crisis, would we admire it? Or would we laugh at it, call it outdated, maybe even see it as a little unhinged? You don't have to stretch your imagination. If a president of a republic did this, it would be an instant meme. And make no mistake, King Charles is not some humble public servant barely scraping by. He is the wealthiest man in Britain not because of hard graft or entrepreneurial genius, but because he was born into a position that grants him access to assets worth billions. He controls the Duchy of Lancaster, the palaces, the art collections, sprawling private estates, and more. His personal fortune is estimated in the hundreds of millions, and that's separate from the Crown estate, which itself rakes in vast sums. Yet the coronation, which cost taxpayers tens of millions, went ahead while the UK faced its worst cost of living crisis in decades. Food inflation soared, energy bills crushed households, and public services creaked under strain. Against that backdrop, the sight of Charles swaddled in gold robes and topped with a diamond-encrusted hat wasn't just absurd, it was a direct insult to those footing the bill. What makes Marina's remark truly dangerous to the palace is that it lays bare how dependent the monarchy is on image. Strip away the costumes, the jewels, the perfectly timed rituals, and you're left with what? A wealthy family whose position is maintained not through democratic consent, but through inherited status. Charles talks about modernizing, about slimming down the monarchy. Yet, when the moment came to show he meant it, he clung to the most outdated, ostentatious display imaginable. Because without the trappings of royalty, the mystique dissolves, and once the mystique goes, people start to ask the kind of questions that could dismantle the whole system. Let's also not forget the hypocrisy at the heart of his personal brand. Charles has spent decades presenting himself as a forward-thinking, environmentally conscious figure. Yet there he was at the coronation, dripping in gold, holding a scepter topped with one of the world's largest diamonds, wearing garments that could feed hundreds of families for a year. It's a spectacle of excess that laughs in the face of the sustainability he preaches. And Marina's choice of words slices right through that double standard, because when you call it fancy dress, you puncture the moral authority the monarch tries to project. Once the image is seen as mere costume, the moral high ground collapses.